This story is a dramatized work of fiction, told to explore family favoritism and boundaries, not to accuse anyone in real life.
The email hit my phone at 7:12 p.m., right as I stepped into the elevator of my building in Chicago, Illinois. And the little gray box on the screen made my stomach go cold in a way no paycheck ever had. Annual performance bonus approved. $18,600. A number that should have felt like relief after a 14-hour day of payroll audits, benefits, disputes, and fixing other people's mistakes with a calm voice and a straight face. Instead, my hands went slightly numb around my key fob, because in my family, a bonus was never a celebration. It was a signal flare. I watched the floor numbers climb in the mirrored walls, watching myself look back. Helen Edwards, 34, the responsible one, the one who always had a spreadsheet, a plan, a backup plan, and a quiet way of making chaos look manageable. I didn't smile. I didn't even exhale. I just waited for the first call, as you wait for thunder when the air already tastes like metal. By the time the elevator reached my floor, I had 3 missed calls from my mother. No happy bonus. No, how are you? No, proud of you. Just urgency, the kind that always belonged to my brother. I stood in the hallway outside my apartment door, listening to the hum of the building, the distant clink of someone's dishes, the soft rush of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. I told myself to breathe. I told myself I was overreacting. Then the text came in. Call me now. Sebastian needs you. I stared at those words until they blurred. Needs you, not needs help, not made a mistake and not scared. Just needs you. Like I was a tool you grabbed from a drawer. I unlocked my door and stepped into the quiet of my condo. The kind of quiet I'd worked years to afford. My shoes clicked on the hardwood. My work tote hit the counter. I set my phone down like it was hot. And that was when the real shock landed. Not from my mother's message, but from the way my body reacted to it. My chest tightened the way it used to when I was a kid. And my parents would say, "We have to talk about Sebastian." I could hear my mother's voice in my head as clearly as if she were in the room. When you have money, you help your family. Like it was a moral law. Like my success belonged to them before it ever belonged to me. I walked to my kitchen window and looked down at the city lights, trying to make sense of the timing. They couldn't possibly know yet. HR had just sent the approval. I hadn't told anyone. I hadn't even called my best friend. And still, my mother was already calling, already circling the number in her mind, already moving the pieces into place. That's when the twist hit me, sharp and unmistakable. They weren't reacting to my bonus. They were waiting for it. They had been waiting for it the way a hungry person waits for a door to open. I didn't feel angry first. I felt embarrassed. Not one of them. Of myself. Because some part of me had still believed I could earn my way into being treated like a daughter instead of an account. I picked up my phone, watched it vibrate again with another call, and I realized something with a strange, steady clarity. This time, I wasn't going to explain. I wasn't going to negotiate. I wasn't going to pay for peace.
If you've ever felt your success become someone else's entitlement, you'll understand what happened next.
In my family, nothing was ever called favoritism out loud. It was always framed as practicality, tradition, or love in its most convenient form. We lived in Naperville, a clean suburb outside Chicago, where the lawns were trimmed and the neighbors waved, and everyone cared a little too much about how things looked from the street. My parents, Linda and Frank, liked to describe us as close. They hosted the holidays, kept the photo frames updated, and spoke about family like it was a brand they were protecting. And in the center of that brand was my brother, Sebastian. He is 5 years younger than me, the kind of person who can walk into a room and make it feel warmer, louder, more alive. My parents called it charisma. I called it permission. I was the older one, the steady one, the organized one, the one who didn't need as much. Because I never asked for much. That was the rule, even when no one said it. When I was 16, I got a part-time job at a grocery store so I could buy my own laptop for school. Sebastian got a used car the summer he turned 16 because he needed freedom. When I asked for help with my first year of college, my father looked at my tuition bill like it was a personal insult. Do you really need to go out of state? Helen? Sebastian switched majors twice, and my mother called it exploring his potential. When I graduated and moved into my first tiny apartment in Chicago, they told me they were proud. But the pride felt distant, like something they were saying for the sake of the moment. Sebastian landed a finance internship, and suddenly it was a family milestone. My father took him out to dinner to celebrate. I watched the photos on Facebook later. It wasn't that they hated me. That would have been simpler. It was that they trusted me to absorb disappointment quietly. They trusted me to be reasonable. They trusted me to make things easier for everyone else. And I spent years telling myself that was maturity, that I was being too sensitive, that I should be grateful I wasn't the one constantly in trouble. That was the trap of it. Their favoritism didn't always look like cruelty. Most of the time, it looked like a small shrug, a quick explanation, a gentle redirect. He's just going through a lot right now. You're stronger than that. You understand, don't you? And for a long time, I did. Or at least I pretended I did. Because pretending kept the peace. Standing in my condo that night, staring at my mother's missed calls, I felt that old question rise again, the one I had tried to bury under adulthood. Was I exaggerating? Or had I simply been trained to doubt my own reality? I called my mother back before I could talk myself out of it. The moment she answered, I knew there would be no congratulations, no pause to ask if I'd eaten, no curiosity about my day. Her voice was bright in that brittle way it got when she was trying to sound calm while already in motion. Helen, thank God. I've been calling. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, just to slow my breathing. What's going on, Mom? A sigh. Practiced. It's Sebastian. He's in a situation. He needs help. There it was. Not that he made a mistake. Not that he's scared. Not that he's asking. Just needs, like the word itself carried a claim. I leaned against my kitchen counter, staring at the unopened mail, the fruit bowl I never remembered to refill, the quiet life I'd built one careful decision at a time. What kind of situation? She hesitated, and in the background I heard a muffled voice. Sebastian's, sharp and impatient. Tell her it's time-sensitive. My mother returned, lowering her tone as if we were discussing something delicate instead of someone else's choices. He's behind on a few things. Rent. A credit card. He had an unexpected expense, and he's trying to keep it from getting worse. I waited for the part where she said, Sebastian is calling because he's embarrassed. Instead, she said, You just got your bonus. Right. The shock was immediate, like ice water poured down my spine. I hadn't told her. I hadn't even told Jennifer at work. HR had sent the email less than an hour ago. How do you know that? I asked, keeping my voice as even as I could. Another pause. Then the answer came too quickly. Your father mentioned it. He gets those cycles. Bonus season. People talk. It was meant to sound casual, like she was commenting on the weather, but the truth underneath it was loud. They were tracking it, watching for it, waiting. In my head, I saw a calendar I'd never been invited to look at. A family schedule where my work was measured not by effort, but by what could be extracted from it. Mom, I said carefully, my bonus is part of my compensation. It's not a family fund. The line went quiet for half a beat. Then her tone shifted. Softer. Disappointed. Helen, don't make this about money. He's your brother. Family helps family. I heard Sebastian again. Closer now, like he'd taken the phone from across the room. Just tell her 10, that's all. 10,000. Like it was a small favor. Like it was a number you ask for. The way you ask someone to pick up milk on the way home. I felt my throat tighten. Not with rage, but with something worse. Recognition. They had decided on an amount before I'd even processed the email. I swallowed. I'm not doing that. I said. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult anyone. I just stated it like a fact. My mother's inhale was sharp. Helen, you've changed. You're so calculating now. The word landed hard because it was the same word my father used when he wanted to turn my boundaries into a character flaw. And in that moment, the shock wasn't that they wanted the money. The shock was that they spoke as if it were already theirs. 2 days later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, trying to force my brain back into normal life. I had an early payroll reconciliation the next morning. I had groceries to order. I had laundry folded into neat stacks that still smelled like lavender detergent. I was doing all the small, sensible things that made me feel like I had control. Then my phone buzzed with an email notification from my father. Subject line? Sebastian. Payment plan. For a second, I thought it was meant for me. My dad had always looped me in on money stuff, not because he trusted me, but because he expected me to fix it. I opened it without thinking. The first attachment was a screenshot of a credit card balance, almost maxed out, with late fees stacked like bruises. The second was an email from a landlord about overdue rent and a final notice. The third was a short message from my father, written in the same tone he used when he forwarded me broken insurance paperwork or a confusing medical bill. Helen just got her bonus. Ask her for at least 10,000. I stared at the sentence until my eyes started to sting. It wasn't the amount. $10,000 was a lot, but it wasn't life or death for me. What made my stomach turn was the assumption, the way my name sat there like a line item, like a resource, like a predictable solution. There was no, can you help? No, she might say no. No, let's not put her in that position. Just ask her. As if my role had already been assigned and accepted. I scrolled up and realized I wasn't the only recipient. My mother was copied. Sebastian was copied. And my name, my actual email address, sat in the thread like someone had dragged it in on purpose. I felt a strange, slow heat spread across my face. Not anger, not yet, but humiliation in its quietest form. Not the kind you feel in front of strangers, The kind you feel when you realize your own family has been discussing you as a tool while you were still trying to be a daughter. I closed my laptop and sat there, hands flat on the table, listening to my refrigerator hum. My condo was clean. My life was stable. I had earned that stability by being careful, by being responsible, by never becoming the kind of person who needed rescuing. And yet, the moment I succeeded, the family story didn't change. It just updated the numbers. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. Don't make this about money. I thought about Sebastian in the background, impatient, as if my hesitation was a personal inconvenience. Then I thought about the way my father wrote it, like he was assigning a task. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a bone that has been under pressure for years and finally gives. I didn't feel hatred. I felt clarity, because I understood what I had been to them all along. Not a sister, not a daughter, a backup plan with a direct deposit.
Be honest. If your own father wrote that about you, would you ever forget it?
That night, I did what I always did when my emotions got too loud. I reached for facts. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my laptop and stared at the empty cells like they were a confession booth I didn't want to enter. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself that every family has rough patches. I told myself my parents weren't monsters. They were just stressed. And Sebastian was just struggling. And I was just the one who happened to be capable. But my fingers started typing anyway, pulling memories into rows and columns, organizing the past into something I couldn't talk myself out of. 2012. I was 17, filling out scholarship applications while my parents drove Sebastian to sports camps and called it an investment. 2016. I graduated from college with loans and a job offer in Chicago. 3 months later, my dad's hours got cut, and my mother called me crying. I sent $600 a month for almost a season, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself this is what grown children do. 2019. Sebastian launched a small online business. My parents called it entrepreneurship. When it failed, they called it bad luck. I paid for the web hosting cancellation fees and a couple of bridge payments because he was between things. 2021. Sebastian got into crypto and day trading. He talked like a podcast, full of certainty and buzzwords. When he lost money, my mother said, everyone makes mistakes. When I asked why he was investing without an emergency fund, my father said, don't lecture him. He's learning. 2023, I bought my condo in Chicago, a modest place I could afford because I'd never taken a vacation bigger than a long weekend. My parents came to see it once. My mother commented on the size of the kitchen. My father asked what my interest rate was. Sebastian didn't come at all. He texted, "Congrats, sis?" And then asked if I could connect him with someone in my company who knew about payroll. I stared at that line in my spreadsheet for a long time, not because it was shocking, but because it was so normal. Each entry on its own could be explained, a family helping each other, a brother finding his way, a daughter doing the right thing. But when I lined them up, year after year, the pattern was impossible to ignore. I wasn't the responsible one because I was naturally better. I was the responsible one because I had been trained to absorb responsibility, while Sebastian had been trained to expect rescue. And even then, my mind kept trying to defend them. Maybe I hadn't said no clearly enough before. Maybe I'd accidentally taught them this. Maybe I was being unfair, keeping score like my father always accused me of doing. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, feeling the old doubt return, familiar and heavy. In my family, questioning the pattern was treated like betrayal, and yet the numbers on the screen didn't feel like betrayal. They felt like proof. The next evening, I knocked on Mrs. Rodriguez's door across the hall with a container of leftover pasta in my hands, the way I always did when my thoughts started circling. She opened it before I even finished the second knock, as if she'd been waiting. Mrs. Rodriguez was 72, small and sharp, with silver hair she wore pinned back and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been a nurse for decades, the kind who could calm a room with one sentence and still call you out when you were lying to yourself. Her apartment smelled like warm bread and lemon cleaner. I stepped inside and exhaled for the first time all day. We sat at her little kitchen table under a yellow lamp that made everything feel softer. She poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs, then watched me the way nurses watch patients who say they're fine. I didn't plan to tell her everything. I was going to make small talk. I was going to ask about her granddaughter, but the words came out anyway, in a low rush. The bonus. The calls. The email from my father. The 10,000 like it was already decided. I expected her to gasp or tell me to forgive them, or ask what I did to make them act that way. Instead, she listened without interrupting. Hands folded. Face calm. When I finished, my throat tight, she reached across the table and covered my fingers with her palm. Some families don't raise children, she said. They raise roles. The sentence landed like a bell in a quiet room. She didn't say my parents were evil. She didn't say my brother was hopeless. She didn't even tell me what to do. She just named what I had been trying not to see. You were assigned the fixer. She continued. Your brother was assigned the dream. And when you try to step out of your role, everyone panics because the whole system depends on you staying in it. I stared at the steam rising from my tea, feeling something loosen inside my chest. I whispered, what if I'm the problem? Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head once, gentle but firm. No, Misha, the problem is that you've been paying for peace your whole life. Then she gave me the most practical advice anyone had offered me in years. Put it on paper, she said. Not to punish them, not to embarrass anyone. Put it on paper so you can't be talked out of your own memory. That Saturday, my parents invited me to dinner in Naperville with the kind of sweetness that always meant something was already decided. My mother texted, your father grilled. Your favorite. Come early so we can talk. I drove out after work, watching the city thin into suburbs, the lanes widening, the houses growing larger and quieter. Their home sat on a tidy street lined with maples, the kind of place that looked like stability from the outside. When I walked in, the smell of steak and rosemary hit me, and for a second, my body wanted to relax out of habit. Then I saw the dining room table. The good plates were out. The candles were lit. And on the sideboard, stacked neatly like a presentation, were papers, a lease agreement, an invoice, a printed email. Sebastian was already there, sitting on the living room sofa with his leg bouncing, his phone in his hand, like he was waiting for a delayed flight. My father stood by the counter, pouring himself a drink, shoulders squared, already in his role. My mother moved too quickly between rooms, adjusting napkins that didn't need adjusting, smiling too widely. "Helen, honey," she said, rushing to hug me. I let her. But I kept my eyes on the table. We ate in the familiar choreography. My father talked about neighborhood updates. My mother asked about my job in a way that sounded polite, not curious. Sebastian barely touched his food. He kept glancing at the papers like they were a timer. When dessert came out, my father set his fork down with the same careful precision he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while applying pressure. "All right," he said. "Let's talk like adults." My stomach tightened. Sebastian leaned forward. "It's not that bad," he said quickly. "I just need a bridge. 10,000 keeps me in my apartment and clears the minimums. Then I can breathe and reset." He said it like he was explaining a business plan, not a pattern. My mother's eyes filled instantly. Right on cue. "Helen, sweetheart, I can't sleep. I'm worried about your brother. He's trying so hard." I looked at the papers on the sideboard and then at them. I kept my voice calm. "Why did all of you know about my bonus before I even processed it?" My father frowned, as if I'd asked something impolite. "Because we know you, Helen," he said. "We know you can handle things. You're stable. You're smart. You always land on your feet." The compliment was a trap dressed in praise. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Just say yes," he muttered, not quite under his breath. I felt my pulse in my throat. I remembered Mrs. Rodriguez's hand over mine. Roles, systems, panic. I set my napkin down and looked directly at my brother. "I'm not giving you $10,000, I said. The words were steady, almost quiet, and I'm not co-signing anything. My mother's face collapsed, tears spilling. "Helen, how can you do this?" My father's voice sharpened. "After everything we've done for you, you're being selfish." I didn't argue. I didn't list my achievements. I didn't raise my voice. I just said the sentence that had been forming in me for years, the one that felt like stepping onto solid ground. "I'm not your emergency fund." The room went still. My father stared at me as I spoke in a foreign language. Sebastian laughed once, bitterly. "Wow! So that's who you are now," my mother whispered. "Please don't make this a scene." I stood, picked up my purse, and nodded once. "I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm just leaving." As I walked to the door, my hands shook, but my spine didn't. Behind me, I heard my father's chair scrape back and my mother's soft sob. I didn't slam anything. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply left because, for the first time in my life, leaving felt like the most respectful thing I could do for myself.
Have you noticed how the moment you say no, they suddenly call it cruelty?
The next week felt like living inside a slow, tightening net. My mother called every morning at 7:15, the same time she used to wake me up for school when I was a teenager. The first day I answered, thinking maybe she would calm down. She didn't. "Helen," she said, voice trembling with hurt. "I don't recognize you. You used to care about your family." I stared at my bathroom mirror. Mascara wand paused in midair and felt the familiar pressure to apologize for having boundaries. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Mom," I said. "I'm doing it to stop being used." The word used made her gasp as I'd cursed. "How dare you say that about us? We're your parents. We've given you everything," I asked, quietly. "What exactly have you given me that you didn't also give Sebastian?" Silence. Then a pivot. "You're keeping score again." That's your problem, Helen. You always make everything transactional. By Wednesday, my father started texting instead of calling. Don't embarrass the family. People notice these things. Be reasonable. It was never about Sebastian's rent. It was about the image, about control, about making sure the story stayed the same. Sebastian's messages were worse because they were dressed as concern. Mom hasn't eaten. Dad's blood pressure is up. Are you happy now? When I didn't respond. He switched tones. You think you're better than us because you have a corporate job. You're cold. You're not normal. The words hit the bruises my family had pressed for years, the ones that said my stability was a personality defect. I tried to keep living my life. I went to work. I balanced benefit deductions. I sat in meetings where people thanked me for being thorough. Then I would step into the elevator and see my father's name on my screen again. And my stomach would drop like I was still 17. The gaslighting wasn't loud. It was constant. They rewrote the dinner as if I'd screamed. They described Sebastian's demand as a small favor. They described my refusal as betrayal. And the worst part was how quickly my brain wanted to believe them, because believing them meant I could fix it. If I were the problem, then I could solve it by being smaller again. I sat on my couch one night with my phone in my lap, watching it light up with another call. And I realized something that made my chest ache. They weren't upset because Sebastian was in trouble. They were upset because I had stepped out of the role that kept them comfortable. I muted the family group chat, not as a punishment, but as a way to hear my own thoughts again. And in the quiet that followed, I felt the last thread of my old hope start to fray. On a Thursday night, after my mother left a 7th voicemail that sounded like grief, but carried the shape of a demand, I opened my laptop and did the one thing my family could never argue with. I made a record. Not a dramatic one. Not a speech. Just a clean, boring trail of facts. I logged into my bank account and pulled statements back to 2016. I filtered for transfers, checks, and payment confirmations that had my parents' names, Sebastian's name, or the same recurring patterns I recognized instantly, the screen filled with small numbers that added up into something heavy. 200 here, 500 there, a rent payment labeled temporary, a credit card payment labeled just this once, a reimbursement I never got reimbursed for. I copied each line into a spreadsheet and added notes the way I would at work. Date, amount, recipient, reason given, outcome. It wasn't about punishment, it was about ending the fog. When I finished, I sat back and stared at the total. $47,000 over 9 years, not including the times I bought groceries, covered dinners, or paid for things that never made it into a bank statement because I'd swiped my card without thinking. My hands didn't shake. My chest felt oddly calm, like the moment after a storm when the air goes still. Mrs. Rodriguez had been right. Once it was on paper, it stopped being a story my family could rewrite. I printed the spreadsheet and slid it into a plain folder, the kind I used for benefits audits. Then I wrote a short email. No accusations, no insults, no therapy language, just boundaries in plain English. I won't be contributing money anymore. I won't be co-signing. I won't be discussing my compensation. Attached is a record of what I have already contributed. I hit send to my mother, my father, and Sebastian. My finger hovered over the extended family list. the cousins and aunts who liked to call when there was gossip. I didn't add them. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. This wasn't revenge. This was me changing the rules of the system quietly, the way you change a lock without announcing it. Within minutes, my mother replied with one line. "Why are you doing this to us?" My father replied with 3. "This is inappropriate. You're being cold." "Stop keeping score," Sebastian replied last. And his message was the shortest. "Wow, you really hate me." I read their responses and felt something settle in my stomach. Not satisfaction, not triumph, just confirmation. None of them had asked if the numbers were wrong. None of them had said, "We didn't realize." None of them had apologized. They only cared that the record existed, because as long as everything stayed vague, they could keep calling it love. But a spreadsheet doesn't care about family titles. It only shows what happened. And once the truth was visible, the old story started to collapse on its own. The panic didn't sound like fear for Sebastian. It sounded like fear of being seen. My mother called first, not once, but 3 times in a row. Until my phone looked like it was vibrating itself off the counter. When I finally answered, she didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I felt the need to document anything. She went straight to the point, voice tight and sharp under the sweetness. "Helen, what is this email? Why would you send something like that?" "Like what?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "A record," she snapped. "You're making your brother look like a freeloader." That word, freeloader. Told me everything, not because I'd used it. I hadn't labeled anyone. I had only listed amounts and dates, but she heard the truth in the numbers and immediately translated it into shame. "Mom," I said, "the record is what happened." She made a small sound of disbelief. "You're acting like an accountant." "Not a daughter." I almost laughed, because I was an accountant in everything but title. My father called next. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. His calm was its own weapon. "This is unnecessary." "Helen," he said, "you're being dramatic. Families don't keep ledgers." I looked out my window at the city lights and felt something quite harden inside me. "You kept the ledger," I thought. "You just kept it in your expectations." Sebastian texted after that, and his anger came in bursts. "You really sent that to them? You're trying to ruin me. You're obsessed. You think you're some hero." I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I didn't argue about the total. I read the messages the way you read a report. You already understand. They weren't upset because I was wrong. They were upset because I had removed their ability to blur the story. Over the next 2 days, my mother left voicemails that shifted tones like the weather: hurt, rage, pleading. Then, late Sunday night, my father sent one final text that was so revealing it almost felt like an accident. "You need to stop this. People will think we raised you wrong." That was the consequence, not a financial crisis. Not concerned for my brother. Image. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for holding the truth in my hands. I felt tired, and I felt awake. A week passed with a strange, brittle quiet. My mother stopped calling every morning. My father stopped texting about the image. Sebastian stopped sending angry paragraphs. For a moment, I let myself believe the record had done what arguments never could, that it had forced reality into the room. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The caller ID read, DuPage Community Credit Union. I almost ignored it. I was in the middle of a benefits review, staring at a screen full of deductions and eligibility codes. But something in my stomach tightened, and I answered. Hello, this is Helen Edwards. Hi, Ms. Edwards, a polite woman's voice said. This is Karen from DuPage Community Credit Union. We have an appointment scheduled for you today at 4:30 to finalize a loan application. I blinked. I'm sorry, I said slowly. I don't have an appointment. There was a pause. The kind that happens when someone realizes they're holding a piece of information that doesn't fit. According to our notes, she continued carefully. You are listed as a co-signer on Sebastian Edwards' personal loan application. We need your presence to proceed, or we will have to cancel the finalization. The shock was physical. My skin went hot. My throat went dry. For a second, I couldn't speak. Not because I was confused, but because I was suddenly aware of how far they were willing to go. I am not co-signing anything, I said. I have not agreed to that. Another pause. I understand. Ms. Edwards, for your protection, we cannot proceed without your signature. I can cancel the appointment. I should have ended the call there. I should have let the system handle it. But my credit, my name, my future, all of it flashed through my mind like a warning light. I asked, quietly, where is the appointment? Naperville branch? She said. And then, as if she were trying to be kind, she added, your parents are listed as attending as well. I stared at my calendar. I stared at the time. I stared at my own hands. I wasn't going there to help. I was going there to stop something that should never have been attempted in the first place. I left work early and drove west, the same route I'd driven for dinner. Only this time my body felt different, less guilty, more alert. When I pulled into the credit union parking lot, my parents' car was already there. Sebastian's BMW sat beside it. Inside, the lobby was bright and quiet, with posters about financial wellness and a bowl of mints on the counter. My mother stood near the chairs, clutching her purse like a prop. My father sat with his arms crossed, jaw set. Sebastian stood when he saw me, relief flickering across his face as he'd won. There she is, he said, too loud. I told you she'd come through. My mother's smile appeared instantly, fragile and hopeful. See, she whispered, you do care. And in that moment, the audacity wasn't the loan. It was the assumption that my presence meant consent. I walked up to the front desk and spoke to the receptionist with a calm, I didn't feel. I'm here to withdraw my name from any application. I said. I did not authorize it. Behind me, I heard Sebastian's voice sharpen. Helen, don't do this! It's just a signature. My father stood. This is not the place for family drama, he hissed. I turned to them, keeping my voice low. Not for their comfort, but for my dignity. I'm not signing, I said, and I'm not discussing it further. The loan officer's door opened, and she looked between us, professional and cautious. I realized then that the system didn't need my folder of records. The credit union only needed one thing, my yes or my no. The folder was for my family, because some people only understand boundaries when they see them in ink.
Have you ever noticed how they call it family only when it benefits them?
The loan officer introduced herself as Karen and led us into a small glass-walled office that looked exactly like every other financial office in America. Neutral carpet, a tidy desk, a framed poster about budgeting. It should have felt ordinary. Instead, it felt like stepping into a room where the family story could no longer hide behind feelings. Karen didn't smile at the tension. She didn't take sides. She simply opened a file on her computer and spoke in the steady tone of policy. "Before we proceed," she said, "I need to confirm consent from the cosigner, Ms. Edwards. Do you understand that cosigning makes you legally responsible for this loan if the primary borrower cannot pay?" I heard my mother inhale, like she wanted to interrupt, to soften it, to make it sound less serious. My father's jaw tightened. Sebastian stared at me with the same expression he used as a kid when he expected me to hand him something I was holding. I looked at Karen and nodded. "Yes, I understand. And to be clear, I am not consenting." Karen didn't react emotionally. She simply typed, "Thank you." Then she turned the monitor slightly, not as a threat, just as transparency. "The application lists you as a cosigner. It also lists a monthly payment amount based on the requested terms." She read the number aloud, calm and factual. It was higher than I expected. My mother's face flickered. Just for a second, like she hadn't been told the whole truth. My father leaned forward. "That can't be right," he said. Karen glanced at the file. "This is what was submitted." She clicked again. "The application also includes a section titled Additional Support." She paused, then read what was written. "Borrower receives ongoing family assistance. Cosigner provides supplemental support when needed." The words hung in the air, clinical and undeniable. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were official. Sebastian shifted in his chair. "That's just wording," he said quickly. "Everyone writes something like that." Karen looked at him, still polite. "We document what applicants provide. Ms. Edwards, since you are declining, we will cancel the finalization." She turned back to me. "Would you like a note added to your profile that you did not authorize to be listed on this application?" My throat tightened. Not with triumph, with exhaustion. "Yes," I said. "Please." My mother's voice broke. "Helen, don't do that. You're making this sound like we did something wrong." I didn't answer her. I watched Karen type a brief note, the kind that would live in a system long after my mother's tears dried. My father cleared his throat. "This was a misunderstanding," he said, the way he always did when the truth got too close. Karen nodded once, not agreeing, simply moving forward. "The appointment is concluded," she said. She stood, signaling the end with professional finality. Outside the office, in the lobby, my mother reached for my arm. "Honey, please. Your brother just needs a little help." I stepped back gently, not yanking away, not punishing her, just reclaiming space. "He doesn't need help," I said quietly. "He needs accountability." Sebastian's face hardened. "You're going to regret this," he snapped. My father said nothing, but his silence was louder than any lecture. As I walked out into the parking lot, the sun was low over Naperville, and I realized what had just happened. The truth hadn't been exposed by yelling. It had been exposed by the procedure. And for the first time, my family couldn't rewrite it as my attitude. I drove back to Chicago in silence, hands steady on the wheel, the radio off. The highway lights blurred into a soft ribbon as the sky darkened. Oh, and I kept replaying the credit union office in my mind. Not the confrontation, but the calmness of it. The way Karen's voice never rose. The way policy did what my words never could. In my condo. I kicked off my shoes and stood in the middle of my living room, looking at the clean lines of the space I'd built. Then I sat on the edge of my couch and finally let myself feel what I'd been avoiding for years. Grief. Not because my brother might struggle, not because my parents were angry, but because I was mourning a fantasy I had quietly paid for my entire adult life. I had told myself, each transfer, each bailout, each emergency payment was a gesture of love, a way of being a good daughter, a way of keeping my family close. But sitting there, I realized the truth was simpler and more painful. I wasn't paying Sebastian's bills. I was paying for silence. I was buying temporary peace, the kind that lasted until the next crisis. I was buying my mother's calm voice for a week, my father's approval for an evening, my brother's friendliness until his next need. And underneath all of it, I was buying the hope that if I did enough, they would finally see me as more than the responsible one. That hope had been expensive. It had cost me money. Yes, but it had cost me something deeper. It had cost me the ability to trust my own instincts. Every time I felt used, I talked myself out of it. Every time I felt invisible, I called it maturity. Every time I felt angry, I swallowed it and called it love. I opened the folder of records on my coffee table and ran my fingers over the printed pages like they were a map. $47,000. 9 years. Hundreds of small moments where I had chosen their comfort over my clarity. And the hardest realization wasn't that they loved Sebastian more. It was that they had learned I would sacrifice myself to keep the family story intact. I didn't hate them for it. Hate would have kept me tied to them. What I felt instead was a quiet, aching acceptance. Maybe they loved me in their way, but they depended on me in a way that wasn't fair. Healing didn't arrive as a big decision or a dramatic cutoff. It arrived as a small, almost boring act of self-protection. The next morning, I opened my calendar and requested 2 personal days from work. Then I booked a tiny cabin rental in Galena, Illinois, for a Sunday and Monday night. Less than 3 hours away, close enough to feel safe and far enough to breathe. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't announce it. I just packed a bag with a sweater, a book, and the kind of groceries I never bought when I was stressed. Fresh fruit, soup, tea. The cabin sat near the edge of a wooded property with a porch that faced a quiet stretch of trees. When I arrived, the air smelled like damp earth and early spring, and for the first time in weeks, my shoulders dropped without me forcing them. I turned my phone off completely and placed it in my bag, zipped, not as a punishment, as a boundary. That first night, I made a simple dinner, sat by the window, and watched the sky fade from gray to deep blue. The quiet felt unfamiliar, like a language I used to know as a child and had forgotten. The next morning, I woke up early and wrote 3 rules in a notebook, the way Mrs. Rodriguez had taught me to write down facts. No loans, no co-signing, no family emergencies without documentation. I stared at the words and felt both relief and sadness. Relief, because the rules were clear. Sadness, because I needed them at all. I wasn't trying to become cold. I was trying to become safe. On Monday afternoon, I called a therapist whose name Jennifer had given me months earlier, and I'd never used. Doctor. Nina Patel. I sat on the porch steps with the phone pressed to my ear, the wind moving through the trees, and I told her the clean version, the favoritism, the money, the credit union call. The way my body reacted was like I was still a teenager. Doctor. Patel didn't tell me to forgive. She didn't tell me to cut them off. She asked one question that made my throat tighten. What would it look like to love your family without abandoning yourself? I didn't have an answer. But for the first time, I felt like the goal wasn't revenge or punishment. The goal was a life where my nervous system didn't treat my own success like danger. That night, I sat with a blanket on the porch, listening to the soft sound of night insects, and I realized something quietly radical. My sanctuary didn't need to be a mansion or a lake house. It could be a weekend when no one could reach me. It could be a notebook with rules. It could be a life where my money was not an invitation for someone else to hunt. And in that moment, healing felt less like winning and more like finally coming home to myself. A year later, it was March again, and my bonus email still arrived the same way it always had. A gray box on a screen, a number, a line of corporate language that was supposed to feel like a celebration. The difference was what happened inside me. I was sitting in my Chicago office, a mug of coffee warming my hands, when HR confirmed the annual bonus, and I felt nothing dramatic, no spike of dread, no instinct to brace for impact, just a quiet awareness that it was mine. I had been seeing Dr. Patel for months by then, not because therapy fixed my family, but because it helped me stop trying to fix them. My parents still tested boundaries, just less aggressively. My mother would call and say, "Your father misses you," as if missing me were the same as respecting me. My father would send articles about family values. Sebastian would go silent for long stretches and then reappear with a casual message like nothing had happened. For a while, I expected the next big demand. It never came the same way again because the system had changed. The credit union note existed. The record existed. And more importantly, my no existed without apology. Sebastian moved back into my parents' house that summer. Not as punishment. As a consequence, he took a regular job, something stable and ordinary, and I heard about it through my mother in a tone that tried to make it sound temporary. He's just regrouping. She said. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I simply let reality sit where it belonged. On my birthday that year, I didn't wait for my phone to light up. I planned a small dinner in the city with Jennifer and a few friends from work. Mrs. Rodriguez came too, wearing a bright scarf and laughing at my attempt to cook something fancy. We ate, we talked, we took a photo that wasn't staged, and when I looked around the table, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Not because everyone agreed with me, because no one was trying to extract something from me. My mother texted later that night, "Happy birthday, honey. I love you. No request attached. It wasn't a miracle, it was a small shift. A quieter version of change." I replied, "Thank you. Mom, I love you too." And I meant it in the only way I could mean it now. With boundaries. With distance where distance was needed. With dignity instead of bargaining. When I walked home afterward, the city air cold and clean. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love was something you earn by being useful. I hadn't gotten revenge. I hadn't exposed my family to strangers. I hadn't won anything except my own life back, and that turned out to be enough. Justice isn't revenge. Sometimes it's just the quiet moment you stop funding your own erasure.
If you've ever been the responsible one, tell me what boundary changed your life.